1/5 of voters could be open to supporting the Jeremy Corbyn and Zara Sultana party. A new Ipsos the UK poll reveals that the left-wing political party recently founded by former Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn and MP Zara Sultana could capture a significant segment of the British electorate. Over 20% of British adults say they would be very or fairly likely to consider voting for a new left-wing party. This figure, however, masks a sharp generational divide. A third of those aged 16 to 34 would consider voting for the new party, a figure that drops to 22% among 35 to 54-year-olds and just 9% among those aged 55 and over. The potential for this new party to disrupt the existing political landscape is most evident in its appeal to voters of other left-leaning parties. 1/3 of those who voted Labour in 2024 and 43% of 2024 Green Party voters would consider lending their vote to a Corbyn-Sultana-led party. Now, these numbers are huge, right? It shows there is potentially real support for this new party, and recent favourable polling for them hasn't been a fluke. But what's interesting is the 43% figure of the Greens. I mean, that could rise as certain constituencies may be more favourable to the new party than the Greens, leaving the Green or Green Party voters to opt to vote tactically. And imagine a real left-wing progressive alliance. We've been waiting for that for years, haven't we? This, of course, is more bad news for the Labour Party, with recent polling putting them on as low as 18% without the inclusion of the New Left Party, proving that they are splitting the vote themselves. Recent comments from Wes Streeting shows that whilst he acknowledges they are facing problems, he still hasn't grasped why they are losing support. Labour has failed to tell a coherent story about the change it has delivered since last year's general election, Wes Streeting has admitted. The Health Secretary said Sir Keir Starmer's party has had a whole number of achievements since coming to power last July, but has not done enough to convince voters it is changing the country for the better. But he urged Sir Keir not to allow Mr Farage to set the agenda, adding that our most successful moments in the last 12 months have been where we have set the agenda. He said people want to feel change. They want to feel like the government is driving the country forward in the right direction. We mustn't fall into the trap of letting Farage set the terms of the debate for us. Now, that last paragraph encapsulates how out of touch he is. I mean, Labour have categorically allowed Reform to set the terms of the debate. I mean, the times where Labour set their own agenda, well, they went after pensioners by removing the winter fuel allowance, right? Refusing to scrap the 2-child benefit cap and cutting benefits. No one forced Labour to do these things. It's entirely their own doing. What's more, he doesn't see that the problem is also policies. It's not that they haven't sold the story of the party well enough. It's that Labour haven't meaningfully changed things, right? People don't just want a slight reduction in waiting times. People want transformational change. Noffel, before I ask you about Wes Streeting's comments, I mean, what do you make of these recent polls?
Not surprised by any means. I mean, Labour has itself completely destroyed its left-wing base because of, you can't actually appeal to left-wing voters if you keep purging left-wing MPs and keep doing non-left-wing things like you said and talked about, cutting the winter fuel allowance and doing massive welfare cuts. So this should come as a surprise to no one, really. What I'm interested in is also looking at the Green Party, right? Because, maybe people could push back on this a bit. Although I like the Green Party under Polanski, I do see Labour possibly appealing to, even if slightly according to that polling, the older demographic more. Maybe possibly because Corbyn has your party appealing to that older vote a bit more than the Greens. Maybe specifically because under Polanski it might be a bit left and it may not appeal to as many Conservative voters, but also along with the fact that Corbyn generally is a name that's more recognised in deindustrialised heartlands. So I'm looking for, hopefully, there being some sort of progressive alliance there to boost those numbers more. But what we are seeing in general is that massive, just 20% is a large demographic of voting population. But it's not just to be looked at as people that are voting for a political party. It's to be also looked at that 20% of the UK that voting demographic are putting their vote behind someone they know they can trust, because that 20% are so extremely economically depressed. The state of the country has gotten so bad, from the job market, from wages being suppressed, from the housing market, that people are willing to do anything at this point. And I think it speaks volumes that this is in response to a Labour government from the left. So the way I see it is, it's not just people that are looking to put their vote somewhere, but it's 20% of people in that polling that are saying enough is enough. We genuinely need real change in this country.
Very interesting what you said about the heartlands, because I do think there are certain constituencies where the Green Party might struggle, but there are other constituencies where they might do better than your party. But for example, as a personal anecdote, I was in Aberfare, near Merthyr Tydfil, actually, a real old working class place, left behind place, proper traditional Labour heartlands, which of course is seeing a big sweep for reform in Wales. And I was having a conversation with someone, went into one of those old classic old men pubs, right? I love those. I like my fancy bougie places, but I also like my old man pubs. And I went in there and I was having a conversation with obviously one of the locals, and he was saying how much he hated Thatcher. And I was like, oh, well, let me buy you a drink, sir. I love this conversation when it starts with Thatcher. But I was also expecting him to say, and that's why we need reform, because so many times I've had conversations where people will say, absolutely despise where the Labour Party has ended up. I used to be Labour, Thatcher ruined everything, and then they say we need reform, right? But he said, you know what? I just love Jeremy Corbyn. Jeremy Corbyn was the only one for me who felt like he actually represented old traditional Labour values in some way. I mean, he's socially way more progressive than what you would consider old traditional values. But in terms of the economy, it was far more of a hark back to Clement Attlee, whether it's industrial policy, whether it's public ownership, something that Blairism and Keir Starmer has completely ignored or destroyed. And this man was saying, yeah, I mean, I really supported Jeremy Corbyn. Like, there's still that support in the old sort of traditional Labour heartlands. In terms of what you're saying in terms of Labour maybe having more of a headway with older people, I mean, they technically would, because they're an established political party. They always have that. But remember, when it comes to the winter fuel allowance, I mean, I think they've really lost that. Labour have never been popular with older people. It's always been Conservatives. Now they're going to reform. So I don't know about you, but I personally don't really mind that much if the Greens or your party don't make headway with older people, because the divide in this country isn't actually class. It's more to do with age. Class plays a role, but age is the biggest factor when it comes to political divides.
Yeah, no, I think you make an interesting point there, and that's a fair assessment to make. The way I would look at it as well is also, I mean, I guess you could say as well that the Green Party, despite under Polanski, could also just generally, I know we're not really talking about the age divide. We know guaranteed that some sort of left-wing alliance will guarantee the young vote. I mean, that's concrete. But there is also generally a feeling amongst older voters of caring for the environment. And I do genuinely think that that is somewhere where Polanski could make headway in, right? Because even under the Green Party with Ellie and Adrian, we've seen that they can win more conservative-minded areas. And so although the older demographic isn't necessarily one that we should be so keen to win on, because it's particularly a bit harder for the left, I think possibly one could make the argument that that is something that the Green Party could gain as well, just because old people in rural areas tend to care a lot about the environment as well.
Yeah, and I suppose that's kind of the pitch from Ellie Jones and Adrian Ramsey. You know, Adrian Ramsey won in Waveney Valley, ex-Conservative place. It's a very, you could call it a Tory Green place, right? Because there is I don't know how big it is, especially with the new influx of members of that Green Tory cohort who are very conscious about the environment. And most people in this country do care about the environment. They really do, actually. Yeah. People are quite pro-green policies, actually, despite the right-wing media saying net zero is a load of rubbish. And I think that Adrian and Ramsey are trying to say that they represent that more. So, I mean, I haven't seen any data to suggest this, but they could say, actually, Zach Polanski becoming leader might bring in more younger people and ex-Corbyn voters or socialists, but could actually lose the sort of Green Tory cohort. Now, for me, I think we should favour the socialists and young people over that, but obviously both would be great. Their argument would be that Zach Polanski might lose on that front.
Well, it's an understandable concern, but like you said earlier as well, if the Green Party doesn't make headway there, you know, you provided an anecdote where your party could, right? Because like I said, Corbyn is a recognizable name in these heartlands, specifically because when people have been asking for transitions to jobs, that is where Corbyn stepped in, and he's talked about these industrial heartlands, which have been forgotten about, even post Thatcher. It's not necessarily like, Tony Blair cared about these areas either, right? For decades, we have seen the fact that no one has really supported these deindustrialized heartlands, but Corbyn's been there, and he always has been. So, I understand, the argument, but I do also think, we should focus generally on urban areas too, because that's where a lot of the vote will be coming in from for young people. So, old people, how do I say it in the most nice way possible? I mean, the older demographic vote is important. Could your party make some headway there? Sure. But, ultimately, like you said, there is also needing to be a focus on the Green Party, specifically gathering some more votes in urban areas, because that's where Ellie and Adrian are just not making any headway at the moment in big enough numbers.
I mean, finally, this brings us back to the original point. I mean, what's your thoughts on Wes Streeting, right? He understands that Labour have failed to tell a story, right?
Mm-hmm.
He still seems to not get why so many people stopped supporting them. Right? He didn't say anything about, in that Guardian paragraph, anything about the policies. He just said, actually, when we set the agenda, we were very successful. And again, I reiterate, the agenda largely has been set by Nigel Farage when it comes to immigration. But the policies that they've come up themselves, which is the winter fuel allowance or scrapping it, keeping the 2-child benefit cap, like these are things that they didn't get asked to do, yet they did it. So actually, the things that I think of the Labour Party in this Labour government, when it's been on their terms, it's been disastrous policies like that. Wes Streeting clearly is still out of touch, and he doesn't get it. And that's not just of Wes Streeting; that's probably for the rest of the Labour Party.
Yeah, I think I said on the first time I ever appeared on this show, where you asked me a question about Wes Streeting, and I said I could see him running for a leader role, right? Because I said he's so slimy in the way that he deals with politics, and the fact he's amassed now about £311,000, right, from private healthcare donations. There's clearly a guy that knows politics and how to play it, and I don't necessarily think it's all about the fact that Wes Streeting applies to this new Labour agenda, which is just continuing neoliberalism with a red rosette. I think it's just genuinely because the capital he's acquired since the election just means he doesn't give a fuck. Because he is getting that money in order to make sure and parrot this idea that Labour is still for the working man. However, money and lobbying is what rules politics at the end of the day. And Wes Streeting wants and continues to bring in that capital. And I think, therefore, he will continue to make these brazen-faced, stupid narratives at the fact that, it's just Labour that has won in the last 12 months by setting the agenda, when we know when Labour has tried to set the agenda, they have failed spectacularly, and people have hated them for it. When it comes to the winter fuel allowance, when it comes to disability cuts, when it's come to the prescriptions of Palestine action, everyone has actually hated when Labour has pulled up their socks, for example, and made a big statement, because they've done everything to capitulate to the right. So the way I see Wes Streeting is just another lobbied, corrupt politician, not necessarily just in the fact, like you mentioned, that there's a general idea in the Labour Party that they are just, making tough changes, but also the fact that this guy is getting lobbied to fuck with, and he's the health minister, and that genuinely makes me very concerned that we've got such a slimy politician, such a high place there, and he's amongst one of the worst in the Labour Party, in my view.
Support independent media, support social justice that's there on social media. Thank you. Turn left.